Before the bartender noticed the woman crying into her third glass of wine, before the couple in the corner booth stopped whispering about her, a voice from behind the bar television cut through the room like a knife drawn slowly across skin. She gave him everything. 12 years, 2 miscarriages, her career. And he told her she was worthless in front of his 23-year-old receptionist. The woman at the bar did not move, but her hand tightened around the glass until her knuckles went white. Then someone added the part that made it worse. And now he is trying to take the house she paid for. 30 feet away, near the back hallway where the light barely reached, a man who had built an empire on silence and calculated violence slowly set down his drink. Because men like him had seen betrayal before. But rarely had he seen someone stripped so completely bare in a public place. Even the crime lord found himself unable to look away. The bar was called the Hollow Oak. It sat on the corner of Ashford and Ninth in a part of the city that had once been fashionable and was now something else. Something quieter. Something that had stopped trying. The brick exterior had darkened with decades of rain and neglect. The neon sign above the door flickered every few seconds, the letter O buzzing like an insect trapped against glass. Inside, the floors were original hardwood, scratched and faded from years of shuffled feet and spilled drinks. The booths along the wall had cracked leather seats held together with black electrical tape. The lighting was dim, not for ambiance, but because half the bulbs had burned out and no one had replaced them. It was the kind of bar where people came to disappear for a few hours, where conversation stayed low and eye contact stayed lower, where the bartender knew better than to ask questions and the regulars knew better than to answer them. The rain outside had started around 7 and had not stopped. It streaked down the windows in crooked lines, distorting the streetlights into long orange smears. The air inside smelled like old wood and whiskey, and something faintly sweet that might have been decay, or might have been the lilies wilting in a vase near the register that no one had thought to throw away. It was Thursday. It was October. And the woman sitting alone at the far end of the bar looked like she had been sitting there for much longer than one evening. Her name was Maren Vielle. She was 34 years old. Her hair was auburn, the kind of deep red that caught light even in dim rooms, but tonight it hung limp against her shoulders, unwashed for 2 days, pulled back with a clip she had found in her glove compartment. Her eyes were the color of winter moss, green with flecks of gray, and they had the hollow quality of someone who had recently stopped sleeping. Not because she could not, but because every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same image. Her husband's hand on another woman's back, the way he had laughed, the way he had not even tried to hide it. She wore a camel-colored coat that had once been beautiful. Underneath it, a black sweater that had been her mother's. Her wedding ring was gone. She had dropped it into the river 3 days ago and watched it sink without ceremony. Her fingers still showed the faint indentation where it had lived for 12 years. Maren had been a commercial architect. She had designed office buildings in 4 cities. She had been featured in a design magazine when she was 29. She had won awards. She had built things that would outlast her. And then she had met Dominic Cray at a client dinner, and something inside her had slowly, invisibly, begun to disappear. It did not happen all at once. It never does. First it was small things. He suggested she work fewer hours. He said he missed her. He said her ambition made him feel unimportant. So she scaled back. Then he suggested they move to his hometown, away from her colleagues, away from her projects, away from the firm that had made her name. He said it would be good for them. He said they could start a family. So she moved. Then the miscarriages came. 1 at 11 weeks. 1 at 15. And Dominic had held her in the hospital both times and whispered that it was okay, that they would try again, and that she was still enough. But somewhere between the second loss and the 3rd year in his hometown, the word enough had stopped meaning what it used to. She had not worked in 3 years. Her savings had been folded into their joint account, which Dominic controlled. Her name was not on the house, even though her inheritance had paid for half of it. Her friends had faded, her confidence had thinned, and the woman who had once stood in front of city councils presenting blueprints now sat at a bar in a forgotten part of town, drinking wine she could barely afford, listening to strangers whisper about her collapse. The worst part was not the affair. The worst part was what he had said when she confronted him. "You were never enough. You were just convenient." He had said it calmly. He had said it in front of the receptionist, a girl named Bria with long legs and a smile that did not yet know what men like Dominic eventually became. And Maren had stood there in the doorway of his office, 12 years of her life collapsing into a single sentence, and she had not screamed. She had not cried. She had simply turned and walked out and kept walking until she reached her car, and then she had driven to the hollow oak, because it was the only place she remembered from before. From the version of herself that used to live in this city. From a time when she still believed she was worth something. Now she sat at the bar with $11 in her checking account, a suitcase in her trunk, and no idea where she would sleep tonight. And she did not yet know that someone was watching. The discovery had happened 6 days ago, a Tuesday. Maren remembered this because Tuesdays had always been the day Dominic worked late. He had told her this for years. Tuesdays were for client calls with the West Coast. Tuesdays were when the quarterly numbers needed attention. Tuesdays were sacred, he said. Do not call. Do not visit. Just trust me. And she had trusted him. For 12 years she had trusted him. But that Tuesday, something had shifted. She had been cleaning out the hall closet, looking for a winter coat, when she found the receipt. It was folded into the pocket of a jacket he rarely wore. A jewelry store, $1,400, a pendant. The date was from 3 weeks earlier. Her birthday had been 4 months ago, and he had given her nothing. Their anniversary had passed in silence. So who was the pendant for? She told herself there was an explanation. She told herself he was planning a surprise. She told herself that 12 years of marriage meant something. That the man who had held her through 2 miscarriages and whispered, "You are enough," would not do this to her. But the body knows before the mind accepts. And Maren's hands were shaking as she drove to his office that evening. The building was a glass tower downtown. Dominic ran a financial consulting firm on the 8th floor. Maren had visited 100 times over the years, back when she was still allowed to visit, back when her presence was welcomed instead of tolerated. She parked in the garage and took the elevator up and walked through the empty reception area toward his corner office. The door was slightly open. The lights were on. And she heard laughter before she saw anything. It was his laugh. The real one. The one he used to give her in the early years, when they would stay up late talking about nothing, when he looked at her like she was the only thing in the room worth seeing. She had not heard that laugh directed at her in years. She pushed the door open. Dominic was sitting on the edge of his desk. His tie was loosened. His sleeves were rolled up. And standing between his legs, her hands on his chest, was a woman Maren had seen before. Bria, the receptionist, 23 years old. Long, dark hair. A smile that faltered the moment she saw Maren in the doorway. No one moved. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Maybe 4. But in that silence, Maren watched 12 years of her life rearrange themselves into a different story. The late nights. The distance. The way he had stopped touching her. The way he had stopped seeing her. It had never been about work. It had never been about stress. It had been about this. About her. About the woman standing in front of him with her hands still frozen on his chest. Maren did not scream. She did not cry. She simply said his name. Dominic. And he looked at her. Not with guilt. Not with shame. With something worse. Annoyance. Like she had interrupted something important. like she was the inconvenience. "What are you doing here?" he said. "I found the receipt." He exhaled slowly. He removed Bria's hands from his chest with a gentleness that made Marin's stomach turn. And then he stood up and walked toward her, stopping 3 feet away, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with something floral that did not belong to her. Marin. He said her name like he was explaining something to a child. "This was never going to last forever. You know that. 12 years. Yes, 12 years. And what do you have to show for it? No career, no children, no ambition. You gave all of that up. And now you want to pretend you are surprised that I found someone who still has a future." Marin felt her legs weaken. She reached for the doorframe to steady herself. "You told me to give those things up. You said we would build a life together. And we did. But the life stopped growing. You stopped growing." He glanced back at Bria, who had retreated to the window, arms crossed, watching. "She still has something to offer. And I do not." Dominic tilted his head. His expression did not change. "You were never enough. You were just convenient." The cruelty of that sentence was not in its words. It was in its precision. Because Dominic had spent 12 years making sure it would land exactly this way. Marin understood this now. She had not understood it while it was happening, because that was the nature of the trap. It was built slowly, one brick at a time, one concession at a time, until the walls were so high you could no longer see the sky, and you had forgotten there ever was a sky to see. It had started with love, or what she thought was love. Dominic had been attentive in the beginning. He had remembered small things, her favorite flower, the way she took her coffee, the name of the professor who had first encouraged her to pursue architecture. He had listened to her in a way no one else had, and she had mistaken his attention for devotion. But attention can be a tool, and devotion can be a leash. The first change was her schedule. He wanted more of her time. He said her firm demanded too much. He said he felt neglected, so she reduced her hours. Then he wanted her closer. He said his hometown had better opportunities. He said they could start fresh. So she left her city, her colleagues, her network, her name. Then he wanted her available. He said working from home made more sense. He said they were trying to have a baby and stress was the enemy. So she stopped working entirely. Each choice had felt reasonable in the moment. Each sacrifice had been framed as love, and by the time Marin realized what she had given up, there was nothing left to reclaim. Her income had been absorbed into their joint account, but the account was in his name. Her inheritance, $200,000 from her mother's estate, had gone toward the down payment on their house, but the deed was in his name. He had handled the paperwork. He had said it was simpler that way. Her friends had faded one by one. Dominic had never forbidden her from seeing them. He was too smart for that. Instead, he made it difficult. He scheduled trips on the weekends she had plans. He made comments about her friends that planted seeds of doubt. He created friction so subtle she did not notice it until the relationships had already withered. And when they were gone, he held her and said, "At least we have each other." Her family was sparse. Her father had died when she was 19. Her mother had passed 4 years ago. She had one brother in another country who she had not spoken to in 3 years because Dominic had convinced her that distance was natural, that people drifted apart, that family was whoever you chose to build a life with. And so Marin had built her life with him. She had poured herself into the foundation of their marriage like cement into a mold. And now she stood in the wreckage of that structure with nothing to her name, no one to call, and a husband who had looked at her with flat eyes and told her she had never been enough. The worst part was that she had almost believed him. For those first 3 days after the office, She had sat in the guest bedroom of the house her money had paid for and wondered if he was right. If she had let herself become small, if she had failed him somehow. But on the fourth day, something shifted. A crack in the guilt. A flicker of something she had not felt in years. Rage. On the sixth night, Marin ended up at the Hollow Oak because she had nowhere else to go. Dominic had changed the locks on the house that morning. She had returned from a walk to find her key no longer worked. Her suitcase, which she had been living out of in the guest bedroom, had been left on the porch. A note was taped to the handle in his handwriting. I have filed for divorce. Do not contact me. My lawyer will be in touch. She had stood on the porch of the house her inheritance had paid for and read that note 3 times. Then she had picked up the suitcase, put it in her car, and driven until she ran out of places to drive. The Hollow Oak had appeared like a memory. She had come here once, years ago, with her mother. A lifetime ago. Before Dominic. Before everything. The bar had not changed. The world around it had. But the bar itself remained exactly as she remembered. Cracked leather. Dim light. The smell of old wood and quiet defeat. She had ordered a glass of wine with the last of her cash. Then another. Then a third. And somewhere between the second and the third she had started talking. She did not mean to. She was not talking to anyone in particular. But the bartender had asked if she was okay, and the word okay had broken something open. And suddenly she was speaking to the air in front of her, like a woman confessing to a priest she could not see. He told me I was worthless. 12 years, and that is the word he used. Worthless. The bartender, a man in his 50s with tired eyes and a gray beard, said nothing. He simply polished a glass and let her speak. I gave him everything. My career, my savings, my mother's money. I moved to his city. I lost my friends. I stopped being myself. And he stood there with his hand on another woman's back and told me I was never enough. A couple in the corner booth had stopped their conversation. They were watching her now. Marin did not care. And now, he has the house. My house. And I have $11 and a suitcase and no idea where I am going to sleep tonight. She laughed. It was not a real laugh. It was the kind of sound that escapes when crying feels too heavy. I used to design buildings. I used to stand in front of city councils and make them believe in things that did not exist yet. I used to be someone. She lifted her glass and stared at the wine. And now I am sitting in a bar talking to myself because there is no one left to call. The bartender set down the glass he had been polishing. He reached under the counter and pulled out a bowl of peanuts and slid it toward her without a word. It was a small kindness, the kind that costs nothing and means everything. Marin looked at the peanuts. She looked at the bartender. And then she put her head down on the bar and pressed her forehead against the cool wood and closed her eyes. She did not see the man in the back hallway rise from his chair. She did not see him place a folded bill on his table and nod once to the bartender. She did not see him walk toward her with the slow, deliberate steps of someone who had learned long ago that urgency was for amateurs. But she felt the air shift when he stopped beside her. And when she lifted her head, there was a man standing 3 feet away with gray-green eyes and a face that looked like it had been carved from something harder than stone. He did not smile. He did not offer pleasantries. He simply said, in a voice low enough that only she could hear, "The building on Merchant and 12th. The one with the copper facade and the cantilevered entrance. You designed that." Marin blinked. She had not heard anyone mention that building in years. How do you know that? The man pulled out the stool beside her and sat down without asking permission. Because I own it. His name was Cormac Blyde. He was 58 years old. His hair was dark silver, cut close to the scalp, and there was a thin scar along his left jawline that most people never noticed because most people did not look at Cormac Blyde long enough to see details. They saw the breadth of his shoulders. They saw the stillness in his posture. They saw the way rooms recalibrated when he entered them, and then they looked away. He had built an organization that operated across 4 counties. He employed over 300 people, most of whom had never seen his face. He had judges who owed him favors, politicians who returned his calls, and a reputation that moved through the city like smoke. By the time you smelled it, something had already burned. But Cormac had not always been this. Once, he had been a boy named Cormac who believed in love. Once, he had been a young man who gave everything to a woman named Seraphine, a woman with dark hair and a laugh that made him forget what he did for a living. He had met her when he was 26, before the empire, before the reputation, before the scar on his jaw. She had been a law student, idealistic, bright. She had known what he was, and she had chosen him anyway, or so he had believed. They were together for 7 years. He had given her everything a man in his position could give. A home in the hills, a car she had admired in a magazine, access to a world she had only read about. And in return, she had given him something he had not known he needed. Peace. The sense that somewhere behind all the violence and calculation, there was still a version of himself worth loving. He had planned to marry her. He had bought a ring. He had arranged a dinner at a restaurant overlooking the harbor. And on the night he was going to propose, he had come home early to find her in their bedroom with his accountant. A man named Gregor who had worked for Cormac for 9 years. A man who knew every secret, every number, every vulnerability. Cormac had stood in the doorway of his own bedroom and watched the woman he loved look at him with something worse than guilt. Relief. Like she had been waiting to be caught. Like the affair was not the betrayal. The betrayal was the 7 years of pretending. She had left that night. She had taken the car. She had taken jewelry. She had taken a suitcase full of clothing and a folder full of documents that Gregor had copied for her. Financial records, property deeds, names. She had been collecting insurance for months. And when she walked out the door, she had turned and said the words that Cormac had never forgotten. You were useful, but you were never enough. He had not killed Gregor. He had wanted to. He had spent 3 days considering it. But killing Gregor would have been a reaction, and Cormac had learned long ago that reactions were for men who had already lost. Instead, he had waited. He had dismantled Gregor's life slowly, methodically, over the course of 2 years. The man had lost his license, his wife, his home, his reputation. And when Gregor had finally come to Cormac's office begging for mercy, Cormac had looked at him with flat eyes and said, "You should have taken the folder and left the woman." Seraphine had disappeared. She had moved to another country with the money and the documents and the life she had extracted from him. Cormac had let her go. Not out of mercy, but out of exhaustion. Chasing her would have meant admitting she still mattered. And Cormac had decided, on the 3rd night after she left, that nothing would ever matter that much again. He had sealed that part of himself off. He had built a wall around it and filled the space with work and silence and control. He had not thought about Seraphine in years. He had not allowed himself to think about her. But sitting in the hollow oak, listening to a woman at the bar describe how her husband had called her worthless and taken everything she had built, the wall cracked. It was not dramatic. It was not a flood. It was more like a door opening in a hallway he had bricked over decades ago. A hallway where a younger Cormac still stood in a bedroom doorway, watching everything he believed in collapse into a single sentence. You were never enough. The woman at the bar had heard the same words. She had given the same years. She had been hollowed out the same way. And something in Cormac Blade, something he had thought was dead, began to move. Maren stared at the man beside her. His presence was overwhelming in a way she could not name. He did not fidget. He did not look around the room. He simply existed in the space beside her, with the density of someone who had long ago stopped needing to prove anything. You own the merchant building, she said. I own several buildings. That one is my favorite. Why? Because the architect understood something most people do not. She understood that strength does not require aggression. The building is powerful, but it does not announce itself. It simply stands. He paused. I have always admired that quality. Marin did not know what to say. She had not thought about the merchant building in years. It had been one of her first major projects. She had poured herself into it, fought for every design decision, argued with contractors and city planners until they understood her vision. And then she had moved on to the next thing, and the next, until Dominic had convinced her that ambition was a flaw and stillness was a virtue. I do not know why you are telling me this, she said. Because I heard what you said. About your husband. About what he took from you. Marin stiffened. She turned back toward the bar and reached for her wine glass. I was talking to myself. You were talking to anyone who would listen. And I listened. Then you heard that I am a disaster. Congratulations. I heard that you are a woman who built something remarkable, and then had it dismantled by a man who was threatened by what you were. He leaned back slightly. That is not a disaster. That is a tragedy. And tragedies can be rewritten. Marin laughed. It was a brittle sound. Rewritten. My husband has the house. My money. My name? On nothing. He has lawyers and accounts and 12 years of documentation proving that everything belongs to him. And I have a suitcase and $11. What exactly do you propose to rewrite? Cormac was silent for a moment. He studied her face the way a jeweler studies a stone, looking for flaws, looking for light. What you want? He asked. The question startled her. No one had asked her what she wanted in years. Dominic had told her what she wanted. Her life had been constructed around his preferences, his schedule, and his vision of what their marriage should look like. The question felt foreign, like a word from a language she had forgotten. I do not know, she said. Yes, you do. She looked at him. His gray-green eyes held no warmth, but they held no cruelty either. They held something else. Recognition, the look of someone who had stood where she was standing and had found a way to walk forward. I want him to feel what I feel, she said quietly. I want him to know what it is like to have everything stripped away. I want him to look in the mirror and see nothing, the way he made me see nothing. Cormac nodded slowly. That can be arranged. Marin shook her head. You do not understand. He is protected. He has connections. He has money. He has. I know what he has. Cormac's voice did not change, but something in it hardened. I also know what I have. And what is that? Resources, information, people who owe me favors, and a particular interest in men who destroy women and call it love. The silence that followed was heavy. Marin felt her heart beating against her ribs. She felt the weight of the moment pressing against her chest. Why? She asked. You do not know me. Why would you help me? Cormac looked at the bar. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Because someone said those words to me once. The same words your husband said to you. And I have spent 25 years building an empire on the ashes of what she took from me. He looked back at Marin. But empires do not fill the space. They only cover it. I do not understand. I am not offering charity. I am offering a transaction. I help you reclaim what was taken. You remind me that the wall I built can still have a door. Marin studied his face. She had become an expert at reading men, at detecting the subtle signs of manipulation, the micro-expressions that preceded violence, the false kindness that always came with conditions. She searched Cormac's face for these things. She found something else. She found a man who had been gutted the same way she had, who had survived it by becoming something harder than the wound, and who was now, for reasons she did not fully understand, offering to share that hardness with her. "Okay," she whispered. Cormac did not take her to a restaurant or a hotel. He took her to a building on the east side of the city, a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. The space was sparse but elegant. A long table, a few chairs, a kitchen along one wall. The kind of place that existed outside the normal world, invisible to those who did not know where to look. A woman was waiting when they arrived. She was perhaps 40, with short black hair and the posture of someone who had spent decades in courtrooms. Her name was Lenora Cassan, and she was the best asset recovery attorney in the state. Cormac made introductions and then stepped back. He leaned against the wall near the window and said nothing. This was Marin's conversation to have. "Tell me everything," Lenora said, and Marin did. She told her about meeting Dominic at the client dinner. The way he had seemed so attentive, so interested, so different from the men she had dated before. She told her about the early years of the marriage, when things had felt good, when she had believed she had found a partner who respected her ambition. She told her about the first compromise, reducing her hours. She told her about the second, moving to his hometown. She told her about the third and the fourth and the fifth, each one smaller than the last, each one easier to justify, until she looked up one day and realized she had compromised herself into invisibility. She told her about the miscarriages, the first one at 11 weeks, when she had woken up in the middle of the night with cramps and known immediately that something was wrong, the second one at 15 weeks, when she had already started buying baby clothes and planning the nursery. She told her about the way Dominic had held her in the hospital and whispered that she was enough, and how those words had felt like salvation at the time. She told her about the isolation, the friends who had faded, the family she had stopped calling, the way Dominic had constructed a world in which he was the only fixed point, and she orbited him like a satellite that had forgotten it once had its own trajectory. She told her about the affair, the receipt in the jacket pocket, the drive to his office, the receptionist with her hands on his chest, the way Dominic had looked at her with annoyance instead of guilt. And she told her about the words. "You were never enough. You were just convenient." Lenora listened without interruption. She took notes on a legal pad with a silver pen. Her expression did not change, but something in her eyes hardened with each detail. When Marin finished, the room was silent. Lenora set down her pen. She looked at Cormac, then back at Marin. "The house," she said. "You said your inheritance paid for half of it." "Yes, $200,000 from my mother's estate, and your name is not on the deed." He handled the paperwork. He said it was simpler. "Do you have documentation of the inheritance? Bank records? Transfer receipts?" "I have statements from my mother's estate attorney. The transfer should be on record." Lenora nodded. "That is a starting point. What about his business? What about it? A man like Dominic does not accumulate wealth cleanly, especially not in financial consulting. There are always irregularities, clients who were overcharged, fees that were not disclosed, accounts that were mismanaged. I do not know anything about his business." "You do not need to. I do." Lenora glanced at Cormac again. "And I have access to people who know how to find what others want hidden." Marin looked between them. She felt the weight of what she was agreeing to settle onto her shoulders. "This is not just about getting my money back," she said slowly. "You want to destroy him." Cormac spoke for the first time since they had arrived. "We want to dismantle him. Destruction is fast and messy. Dismantling is slow and thorough. He will not see it coming until there is nothing left to save." Marin thought about Dominic's face in the office, the contempt in his eyes, the way he had looked at her like she was an inconvenience, an obstacle, a problem to be disposed of. She thought about 12 years of her life poured into a marriage that had never valued her. She thought about her mother's money sitting in a house she could not enter. She thought about the girl she had been before Dominic, the one who had stood in front of city councils and made them believe in things that did not exist yet. "What you need from me?" she asked. Lenora smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just been given permission to hunt. "I need you to tell me everything you know about his finances, his clients, his schedule, and his habits. I need you to remember every conversation, every document, and every detail you might have dismissed as unimportant. And I need you to trust that what we are about to do is not illegal." Marin raised an eyebrow. "Mostly not illegal," Lenora amended. "The law has edges. We simply know how to walk along them without falling off." Marin looked at Cormac. He was still leaning against the wall, his face unreadable. "Why mostly?" she asked. "Because your husband has spent 12 years operating in gray areas. He has taken advantage of loopholes, manipulated regulations, and exploited people who trusted him." Lenora folded her hands on the table. "We are simply going to introduce him to the consequences of building a life on sand." Over the following week, Marin lived in a small apartment that Cormac owned in a building with no name on the directory. It had a bed, a kitchen, a desk, and a window that looked out onto a courtyard with a single tree. The rent was covered indefinitely. The refrigerator was stocked. The door had 3 locks. She spent her days with Lenora, reconstructing 12 years of marriage into a dossier of evidence. She remembered details she had not known she remembered. The client whose retirement fund Dominic had handled personally, the one who had called the house 3 years ago asking about discrepancies in his statements. The offshore account Dominic had mentioned once during an argument, claiming it was for tax purposes. The way he had reacted when she asked to see their joint financial statements, deflecting, delaying, and changing the subject. Lenora took each fragment and connected it to others. She had investigators. She had forensic accountants. She had a network of people who specialized in finding the things powerful men tried to bury. By the 5th day, the picture was becoming clear. Dominic Cray had been skimming from client accounts for at least 6 years. Small amounts at first, then larger. He had been funneling money into shell companies registered under false names. He had been charging fees that were never disclosed in contracts. And he had been using Maren's inheritance as collateral for a loan he had taken out against the house without her knowledge. The house, Lenora explained, was leveraged. It was not an asset. It was a liability. And when the loan defaulted, which it would within the year, the bank would seize it. He was going to lose the house anyway, Marin said. "Yes, but he was going to make sure you had no claim to any of it before that happened." The divorce filing was not about ending the marriage. It was about protecting himself from the collapse. Marin sat back in her chair. She felt something cold settle into her chest. Not sadness, not anger. Something more focused, more deliberate. "What do we do?" Lenora opened a folder and spread documents across the table. "First, we file a counterclaim in the divorce. We document the inheritance. We establish your contribution to the marital assets. We make the case that the deed was fraudulently kept in his name. And second, we contact the clients who were defrauded. We provide them with documentation. We suggest they speak with regulators. That will destroy his business. That will end his business. There is a difference. Ending is clean. Destruction leaves wreckage. We want him to watch it end, piece by piece, knowing exactly what is happening and being powerless to stop it." Marin looked at the documents. She saw names, numbers, dates. The architecture of Dominic's deception laid bare. "And third?" she asked. Lenora glanced at Cormac, who had been sitting in the corner throughout the meeting, silent, watchful. "Third is his," Lenora said. Cormac leaned forward. "Your husband has a reputation. He is known as a successful man, a respectable man. He attends charity events. He sits on boards. He has cultivated an image of integrity that has protected him for years. Marin nodded. That image is about to change. Cormac's voice was flat. There are certain photographs, certain recordings, certain communications that were obtained by people who owe me favors. They document behavior that his social circle would find unacceptable. What kind of behavior? The kind that ends invitations. The kind that removes names from donor lists. The kind that turns colleagues into strangers. Marin felt her heart beating faster. She thought about Dominic's smug face, his designer suits, his corner office, his certainty that he was untouchable. When? She asked. Cormac stood. It has already begun. The first satisfying blow landed on a Wednesday morning. Dominic arrived at his office to find two men waiting in the lobby. They were from the State Financial Regulatory Board. They had questions about client accounts. They had subpoenas. They had the kind of expressions that told him this was not a courtesy visit. He spent 4 hours in a conference room answering questions he did not have good answers for. By noon, his lawyers were involved. By 3 o'clock, 3 of his largest clients had called to terminate their contracts. By evening, the firm's website had been taken down pending investigation. He did not know how the regulators had found out. He did not know who had provided the documentation. He only knew that the foundation he had spent 15 years building was suddenly cracked. The second satisfying blow landed the following week. An article appeared in the city's business journal. It was written by a financial journalist who had been investigating consulting fraud for years. The article named Dominic's firm. It detailed specific allegations. It quoted former clients who had discovered discrepancies in their accounts. It included photographs of documents that should have been confidential. Dominic's picture was on the front page. The headline read, "Respected consultant accused of systematic client fraud." He tried to contain the damage. He issued statements. He threatened lawsuits. He called in favors from people he had cultivated for years. But the favors did not materialize. The calls were not returned. The people who had once sought his company suddenly had prior engagements, scheduling conflicts, reasons they could not be seen with him. The third satisfying blow landed on a Saturday evening. Dominic attended a charity gala at the Grand Harmon Hotel. It was an event he had attended for 8 consecutive years. He was a platinum donor. His name was on the program. He expected to be welcomed as he always had been. Instead, he was met at the entrance by the event coordinator, a woman named Patricia, whom he had known for a decade. She smiled at him, the way people smile at strangers. "Dominic," she said, "I am afraid there has been a complication with your table assignment." "What kind of complication?" Patricia's smile did not waver. "We have received some concerns from other attendees. Given the recent press coverage, the board felt it would be best if you did not attend this evening." Dominic stared at her. "You are asking me to leave. I am suggesting that your presence might create discomfort for other guests." Patricia handed him an envelope. "Your donation has been returned, of course. We appreciate your past support." Dominic took the envelope. He looked past Patricia into the ballroom, where men and women in evening wear were laughing and drinking and pretending he did not exist. He left without another word. The fourth satisfying blow landed in the courtroom. Lenora had filed the counterclaim 2 weeks earlier. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday. Dominic arrived with his legal team, confident that his documentation would prevail. But Lenora had documentation of her own. She presented bank records showing the transfer of Maren's inheritance into the joint account. She presented evidence that the inheritance had been used as the down payment on the house. She presented a forensic analysis of the deed transfer, demonstrating that Maren's signature had been forged on the document that removed her name from the property. The judge examined the evidence. He asked Dominic's lawyers to explain the discrepancies. They could not. The court ruled that Maren was entitled to half the value of the house, plus damages for fraud, plus attorney's fees. The total amount exceeded what the house was worth. Dominic would have to sell everything to pay it. The fifth satisfying blow fell quietly. Bria, the receptionist, left him. She had not signed up for scandal. She had not signed up for a man whose name was toxic, whose accounts were frozen, whose future was collapsing. She packed her things and moved back to her hometown and did not leave a forwarding address. Dominic came home to an empty apartment. The house had been seized by the bank. The office had been closed by regulators. The woman he had discarded his wife for had discarded him in turn. He sat in the silence of a rented room and understood for the first time what it meant to be worthless. The sixth satisfying blow was Marin herself. She did not visit him. She did not call. She did not gloat. She simply existed, visibly, in the city that had once been his. She reopened her architecture practice. She took on clients. She appeared in the same business journal that had published his downfall, this time in a feature about women returning to their careers after leaving abusive marriages. The article mentioned her work on the merchant building. It mentioned her new projects. It mentioned her resilience. It did not mention Dominic by name. It did not need to. Everyone who read it knew. And Dominic, sitting alone with a newspaper he could barely afford, read about his former wife's success and felt the full weight of everything he had thrown away. 6 months later, Marin stood in front of a building she had designed. It was a community center on the west side of the city, 3 stories, curved glass facade, a rooftop garden visible from the street. She had donated her services to the project, working with a nonprofit that provided resources for women leaving abusive relationships. The dedication ceremony was small. A few dozen people, supporters, volunteers, women who had used the organization's services. There were no photographers from major papers. There were no politicians seeking visibility. Just people who understood what the building represented. Marin did not give a speech. She simply cut the ribbon and stepped back, and watched as people walked through the doors of something she had created. A woman approached her afterward. She was perhaps 30, with tired eyes and a tentative smile. "You built this," the woman said. "I designed it. Other people built it." The woman shook her head. "You know what I mean." Marin did know. "I was in a place like this once," the woman continued. "Not this building, but a place like it. Somewhere safe. Somewhere that reminded me I was still a person." Marin nodded. "Thank you," the woman said, "for making another place like that." She walked away before Marin could respond. That evening, Marin returned to her apartment. It was different from the one Cormac had provided in those first weeks. This one she paid for herself. It had 2 bedrooms, a small office where she worked on designs, and a balcony that overlooked the river. She poured a glass of wine and stood on the balcony and watched the lights of the city reflect on the water. Her phone buzzed. A text from Lenora. "Final settlement processed. All funds transferred. It is finished." Marin read the message twice. She thought about Dominic, wherever he was now. She had heard he had left the city. She had heard he was working for a small firm in another state, doing entry-level work for a fraction of what he had once earned. She had heard he had started drinking. She did not feel satisfied. She did not feel victorious. She felt something quieter, something that might have been closure. Her phone buzzed again. A different number. The courtyard downstairs. "If you have a moment." She knew who it was. Cormac was standing beneath the single tree in the courtyard. He wore a dark coat. His hands were in his pockets. He looked the same as he had that night in the hollow oak, 6 months ago, when he had sat down beside a stranger and changed the trajectory of her life. Marin walked toward him. "You did not have to come," she said. "I wanted to see how the building turned out. The community center. You saw the pictures. Pictures are not the same." They stood in silence for a moment. The tree above them rustled in the evening breeze. "Thank you," Marin said. "For everything." Cormac shook his head. "You did the work. I simply opened a few doors. You did more than that. You made me believe I was worth the effort. Cormac looked at her. For the first time since she had known him, his expression softened. The hard lines around his eyes eased. The mask moved half an inch. You reminded me of something, he said. What? That walls do not have to be permanent. That the doors we seal shut can be opened again. He paused. I had forgotten that. Marin studied his face. She saw the scar on his jaw. She saw the weight of decades in his eyes. She saw the boy who had once believed in love and the man who had buried that boy under layers of stone and silence. What you will do now? She asked. Cormac looked up at the tree. I do not know. Something different, perhaps. He looked back at her. Something that does not require walls. Marin nodded. They stood together for another moment. Two people who had been hollowed out by betrayal and had found, against all expectations, a way to fill the space again. Then Cormac turned and walked toward the street. Marin watched him go. She watched his silhouette disappear around the corner. She watched the empty space where he had been standing. Then she turned and walked back inside. In her apartment, she sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She had a new project starting next week. A residential building for a developer who valued her vision, a chance to create something that would outlast the memory of everything she had lost. She looked at the blank screen. She thought about the woman who had approached her at the dedication ceremony. She thought about the doors Cormac had mentioned, the ones that could be opened again. She began to draw. Outside, the city hummed with its usual noise, cars and voices and the distant sound of music from somewhere down the street. The river reflected the lights. The tree in the courtyard swayed gently, and in a small apartment on the west side of the city, a woman who had once been told she was worthless sat at a desk, designing something new. Not for anyone else, for herself.